Interpretation. That's our next word. This is another one that, kind of has varying examples with. Let me just go with the definition. All right, definition: the process of explaining or understanding the meaning of a text, often within its historical and literary context. All right, once again, I just want to say that one more time because it's kind of long. The process of explaining or understanding the meaning of a text, often, I use keywords often there because it doesn't always happen, with its historical literary context. So an example of this would be interpreting Jesus's parables in light of the intended audience. One of the common things that some people will do when it comes to the parables is they will look at it and try to apply it to their lives immediately without thinking of what was going on at that time. I'm a great example, just thinking off the top of my head, the parable of the wineskins. Good luck on some people there trying to figure out how to apply that to their, understanding that their interpretation of that without the historical context, because the historical context needs to be in there to really actually understand what is Jesus talking about. Wineskins tearing and patching and, all that kind of stuff. That's why it is important that interpretation does involve the historical and literary context of the time. But an interpretation is always going to be someone's own personal, I guess you could say, like, revelation of that.
And it's just like my favorite parable is the parable of the pearl of great price. It's only 2 verses. It's real easy. But the guy sold everything he had, and that doesn't mean that I have to go sell everything that I have. But what it means is I need to sell myself to Jesus completely. I need to give everything in my life to him. It doesn't mean I got to go sell my car and sell my house and all that to get that pearl. What it means is I have to just completely sell myself out to Jesus.
Oh, yeah, because people will take it, and I'm so glad you brought that up, because parables, I think, was the perfect example for this, because so many people try to look at parables, once again, they're over digging. They're like data mining the parable for every little tiny detail in there, and that wasn't the point of the parable. The parables almost all the time were heaven and hell implications. We're talking about salvation. It was the overall. Jesus, if you did not know, often talked in hyperbole. He, when he said, if your left eye causes you to sin, go ahead and gouge it out, for it's better to enter the kingdom of heaven with one eye than it is with or go to hell with 2 eyes.
How many people in the history have done that because they read it?
There were sadly people in history that thought that they had to debase themselves and beat themselves up. Paul actually had to write about it. It was going on in the early church.
What's the people who whip themselves as they walk through the street for trying to signify, because they think that you have to.
And that's a dangerous method when it comes to interpretation. That's why, once again, going back to our word context is king in that when you start to interpret a passage. But once again, I do want to say that doesn't mean that God, one passage might speak to you at one point in time one way and then speak to you maybe a little bit different later on. That does happen. That's a truth for you. You know what I mean? You don't go out there. One of the things I think some Christians don't get, and I remember when I was in a little bit of a cage stage, I was guilty of this, but I would go out thinking that this was for everybody and impressing it on them. No, God, through his working in you, might shine this to you in a slightly different light than other people. Although there is one real meaning, you might have an interpretation from that text that directly applies to your life, but maybe not somebody else's in the same way that you're thinking. I hope that made sense. I know that was kind of like,
and like you said, there's things that you're going to get out of it, and God's going to speak to you away, and it's going to be powerful and awesome. And then 2 or 3 years later, you're going to read it again. You're going to have a totally different perspective out of that exact same verse of scripture. So I understand that one completely.